Hey, everyone, and welcome to AI Divine Insights. Ever wondered what AI could teach us about religion? Well, that's exactly what we're here to find out. In this channel, we'll use cutting-edge AI to analyze religious texts, uncover hidden meanings, and spark insightful conversations about faith, philosophy, and the human experience. So grab a cup of coffee, get ready to think outside the box, and let's explore the divine together.
Welcome back, everybody. We're taking another deep dive today, and we're tackling a pretty big question.
Oh, yeah.
The question of how the world began.
Yeah, the ultimate origin story, right?
Exactly. And we're going to be looking at it through the lens of the book of Genesis,
Okay.
specifically the creation narrative as it appears in the New King James Version.
Sounds good.
Now, this story, it's been around for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to explain these really big ideas.
Yeah.
You know, where we came from, what's our purpose,
Right.
what's our place in this whole vast universe.
It's incredible how relevant it still feels today, even after all this time. Like, it still speaks to some of our deepest questions about existence.
It really does. So let's dive into it, shall we?
Let's do it.
Those famous 7 days of creation.
Right.
Day 1 starts with this really vivid image.
Okay.
The earth is formless, void, and darkness was on the face of the deep.
It's like this primordial soup, right?
Yeah, it's like this blank canvas, just waiting for that first breaststroke.
Okay.
And then, bam, those iconic words, let there be light.
Ah, there it is.
And it's not just light,
Yeah.
it's this incredible statement about divine power.
Right. It's the first act of creation.
Yeah, light, which represents,
Yeah.
knowledge,
Well,
order.
that's great.
It bursts forth from the chaos.
Like a beacon in the darkness.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's like someone just flipped a switch.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And suddenly there's this distinction, right,
Yeah.
between light and darkness,
Day and night.
day and night.
Yeah.
And this sets up a pattern
Okay.
that we see throughout the whole creation story.
Mm.
God bringing order out of this primordial chaos.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really important theme, isn't it? This idea of a divine force imposing order on a formless void.
Absolutely. And it's not just order for order's sake. There's this sense of deliberate creation. Remember that phrase that pops up after each stage?
Yeah.
And God saw that this was good.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's like this cosmic seal of approval.
Exactly. Like God's taking a step back after each creation, admiring each piece of the masterpiece.
Like, yep, nailed it.
Exactly. It's emphasizing that creation is inherently good.
It's a reflection of God's divine intention. I mean, that's powerful stuff, right? To think
Okay.
that the very act of creation is infused with goodness.
It really is. So we have light, darkness, day, night.
Mm-hmm.
Things are starting to take shape. But on day 2, things get a little more, shall we say, abstract.
Oh, how so?
Well, this is where we encounter the firmament.
The what?
The firmament. It's described as this dome-like structure
Okay.
that separates the waters above from the waters below.
Now those waters above, that's always intrigued me. What exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's a bit of a head-scratcher, isn't it?
Oh,
Imagine this vast cosmic ceiling separating the heavens from the earth. And get this firmament is what's called heaven.
Wow. I mean, that image alone is just, it's so vast, and the waters above have been the subject of so much debate.
They have.
I mean, some scholars, they take it literally.
Yeah.
Like there's this literal celestial ocean up there. While others, they see it more symbolically
Mhm.
as this representation of the heavens,
All right.
a realm beyond our understanding.
Like, the spiritual realm, something like that.
Exactly, something that we can't perceive with our earthly senses.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? This whole idea of a universe so different from how we understand it today.
It really is. It reminds us that we need to consider these stories within their historical and cultural context, The ancient Israelites had a very different understanding of the cosmos than we do.
For sure. And to them, those waters above, they might have been a very real, very tangible thing.
Absolutely. It was part of their worldview, and understanding that worldview is key to unpacking the deeper meaning of these stories.
Right. So by day 2, we've got light, darkness, day, night, this separation of heavenly waters from earthly waters. The canvas is starting to fill in. But there's something pretty important missing, wouldn't you say?
What's that? Land.
Ah, yes. Of course, got to have some solid ground. Yeah. You can't have a world without land, right? Well, that's what day 3 is all about. Those waters below, they gather together.
Okay.
Dry land appears. We have the earth and the sea.
So the stage is set, so to speak.
It is. And then something truly spectacular happens.
Oh, do you tell?
It's this sudden burst of life.
Whoa. Okay.
The text describes this incredible abundance of plant life.
Right.
Grass, herbs, fruit trees,
All springing up at once.
all springing forth, each plant bearing seed,
Wow.
each one carrying the potential for future generations.
So life just explodes onto the scene.
It does. Can you imagine witnessing that?
That would be incredible.
To see a barren, rocky landscape suddenly teeming with vibrant plant life.
It must have been an awe-inspiring sight, you know, to see this transformation unfold.
I know, and this is also where we see another key concept being introduced.
Oh, what's that?
The idea of life reproducing according to its kind.
Right, right. So each species has its own distinct nature, its own blueprint for life.
Exactly. And this idea of fixed species, it's going to play a key role as the creation story continues to unfold.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What comes next?
Well, we'll have to wait for the next part of our deep dive to find out.
All right. You got me hooked. I can't wait.
We left off with this world just bursting with plant life.
Yeah, greenery everywhere.
Like a giant botanical garden.
It's beautiful.
But something's missing. Something pretty major, actually.
Oh, what's that?
Well, think about it. We've got light and darkness, day and night. But are there any actual light sources? I mean, beyond just the idea of day.
Ah, I see. You're right. So where does the light come from? That's where day 4 comes in.
Yep. Day 4 is all about the celestial bodies. God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Ah, the heavenly lights.
And they're not just there for decoration, you know.
Right. They're not just pretty twinkling things.
Exactly. They have very specific purposes. They serve as markers of time.
Ah, right. The sun and moon, they divide day from night, obviously. But they're also the basis for our calendar, right? The seasons, the days, the years.
Yeah, it's like God set up this incredible cosmic clock to govern the world.
It's amazing when you think about it. I mean, these ancient people, they were already observing the heavens.
They were. And using them to track time.
And to navigate.
Exactly. Now, here's something I find really fascinating about this part.
Okay.
The text describes the sun and moon as two great lights.
Interesting. It seems like a small detail.
It does, but I think it has big implications, don't you think?
Oh, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, it challenges that geocentric view of the universe. That was the prevailing belief back then, you know, that the Earth was the center of everything.
Right.
But here in Genesis, the sun and moon are presented almost as equals.
Yeah.
It suggests this much more expansive view of the cosmos.
Like maybe a hint that the universe was far grander than anyone could even imagine back then.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? That even in this ancient text, you can find these glimpses of a universe that's far more complex than they probably understood at the time.
Totally. But let's get back to the story, shall we? So we have light, darkness, day, night, a firmament, land, sea, and vegetation. Plus we have a sun, a moon, and stars to light it all up.
Okay, the world's really starting to take shape.
It is. But what's missing?
Let me think. Well, we've got the stage set, we've got the scenery.
Right.
But we need some actors. It's time to populate this world.
You got it. Day 5 is all about the creatures of the waters and the skies.
Ah, so things are finally getting a little lively.
They are. We have all sorts of sea creatures swimming and teeming in the waters.
Okay, picture it. All sorts of fish, whales, maybe even some fantastical creatures that we can't even imagine today.
And then there are the birds soaring high above the earth.
Filling the skies with their songs.
I love that image. It really captures this sense of a world coming alive. And once again, we hear that divine blessing, be fruitful and multiply.
Right, that recurring theme. It speaks to this incredible drive to reproduce, doesn't it?
It does. This drive to fill the earth with life in all its diverse forms.
It's a powerful message. We've gone from this formless void to this world just brimming with life and energy.
And you can almost feel this momentum building, can't you, as the creation narrative unfolds.
I totally agree. So we've got plants, sea creatures, birds. What else could there possibly be?
Well, on day 6, things take a dramatic turn. It's time for land animals.
Ah, so we're getting close to the main event.
We are. And of course, day 6 is also the day for the stars of the show. Us.
Humans. Finally making our grand entrance.
Exactly. Day 6 starts with the creation of all sorts of land animals. You know, cattle, creeping things, beasts of the earth. It's like this whole parade of creatures.
The animal kingdom in all its glory.
And then the narrative shifts. We arrive at this pivotal moment,
Right.
the creation of humankind.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It does. The text tells us that humans are created in God's image.
Ah, that's a powerful statement. It sets us apart, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests this special connection to the divine.
Right. A unique capacity for reason, creativity, even a reflection of God's own nature. Yeah.
What do you think it means to be made in God's image?
Whoa, that's a question that's been pondered for centuries. Is it about physical resemblance? Or is it something deeper, something about our souls, our minds, our capacity for love and compassion? It really makes you think.
It does. And there's another key concept introduced on day 6, dominion.
Right. Genesis tells us that humans are given dominion over all other creatures.
But that word dominion, it can be interpreted in so many ways.
It can, can't it? Some people see it as a call to be responsible stewards of creation, to care for the earth like a gardener cares for their plants. Others interpret it as giving humans this hierarchical authority over nature, the right to use and even exploit the earth's resources.
It's a debate that's still going on today, especially with all the environmental challenges we're facing.
Yeah.
How we interpret dominion has huge implications for how we relate to the natural world.
Absolutely. It makes you question our role on this planet, doesn't it? What are we here to do?
It really does. Now, before we move on, there's one more important detail about day 6. The text makes it clear that both male and female are created.
Right, establishing the foundation for human relationships, families, society.
Exactly. And just like the animals, humans are blessed with that command. Be fruitful and multiply.
Okay, but this time there's an additional instruction, right? Fill the earth and subdue it.
That's right. So it's not just about reproducing, it's about shaping and cultivating the world. It's like this sense of purpose, this agency that's woven into human existence.
That's interesting. So by the end of day 6, we have this world teeming with life, humanity right at the center of it all.
But there's still one day left.
Oh yes, day 7, a day unlike any other.
A day of rest. After 6 days of creation, God rests.
This is where we get the idea of the Sabbath, right? A day for reflection, rejuvenation.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even in this world of constant activity, even amidst all this creation, there needs to be a time to pause, to appreciate what's been made, and to reconnect with the divine. Well, here we are at the end of our journey through those 7 days of creation. We've gone from a formless void to a world just teeming with life.
All in the span of a week.
A week, at least according to the book of Genesis.
It's quite a story, isn't it? Tacked with so much symbolism.
And these really profound ideas about, where the universe came from and our place in it.
It really makes you think about some pretty big questions.
Yeah. And even though it's presented in this condensed, almost poetic form,
Right.
it manages to touch on some pretty fundamental things.
It does. The nature of creation, the power of divine will, the relationship between humanity and the natural world.
So let's recap some of those key takeaways, shall we?
Sure.
First, we see that the world is created through these divine pronouncements.
Right.
God speaks, and it is so, like this master plan.
Yeah, blueprint for the universe.
And there's a clear hierarchy to it, too. It starts with those most basic elements.
Light and darkness.
Then it progresses through each stage. Sky and water, land and vegetation, celestial bodies.
Sea creatures, birds, land animals.
And finally, at the very top,
Humanity.
the culmination of it all. And of course, humanity is given this really special status.
We are. Created in God's image.
Which sets us apart from every other creature, and we're granted dominion over all creation.
Two really powerful concepts that have had a profound impact on everything, really.
They really have. And they're still being debated today,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it truly mean to be made in the image of God?
Right.
And what are the limits, if any, to our dominion over creation?
Those are really tough questions.
They are.
Questions that each of us has to grapple with on our own.
But that's what makes the Genesis creation narrative so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't give us all the answers.
It doesn't.
It presents these profound ideas and then leaves it up to us to wrestle with them, to find our own understanding.
It's a story that has sparked countless interpretations and debates throughout history, and it still challenges us to think deeply about our place in the grand scheme of things.
What resonates most with you from this story?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's the sheer creative power on display. The idea that the world, in all its complexity and beauty, could arise from this act of divine will.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's humbling and awe-inspiring all at the same time.
I get that. And for me, it's the emphasis on order emerging from chaos. It's this theme that we see throughout history, even in our own lives,
Like we're always striving to create order.
to make sense of the world around us,
Yeah, it's like this fundamental human impulse.
to find meaning and purpose in the midst of all the uncertainty.
And the Genesis creation narrative, I think, offers a really powerful way to understand that impulse.
It does. It suggests this divine order underlying all of creation.
And that we as humans, we have this role to play in maintaining that order.
It's a big responsibility.
It is. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the Genesis creation narrative.
We have. It's been quite a journey.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
If we are truly created in the image of a divine being, what does that say about our own potential?
I like that.
Do we carry within us a spark of that same creative power that brought the world into being? Something to think about.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Genesis creation narrative.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another exploration of these. All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time we're tackling Genesis 2.
From the New King James Version.
Right, the New King James Version.
Yeah.
And we're focusing in on the creation story.
The Garden of Eden.
Yeah, the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting stuff in there about how man and woman were created and why that seventh day is so important.
And we can't forget about that forbidden fruit.
That forbidden fruit. And get this, we're also going to be talking about a river that splits into 4 different rivers.
Oh, yeah.
Each with its own, unique characteristics.
That's right.
So let's dive in.
It's interesting that we're exactly starting from scratch here.
Oh.
Genesis 2 picks up right where Genesis 1 left off.
Okay.
So we're not seeing the initial creation, but kind of like the final touches,
Okay.
God putting the finishing touches on the heavens, the earth, and everything in them.
So it's like the world is already complete,
Mm-hmm.
and then in Genesis 2.2, God rests. Not just any rest, though.
Yeah.
He blesses the seventh day
Mm.
and makes it holy. So is that where the idea of Sabbath comes from?
You got it. That's the foundation of the Sabbath, which, as you know, is super important in both Jewish and Christian traditions.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Right from the start, there's this emphasis on taking a day of rest,
Right.
a time to reflect and rejuvenate and connect spiritually.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It really is.
Okay, so we've got a finished world, a well-rested God. What happens next? What's the scene look like?
Picture this. A world before plants, before even rain.
Whoa.
Genesis 2.5 describes a mist rising from the earth to water the ground. It's this kind of primordial setting, almost ethereal,
Yeah.
and that's where God creates man from the dust of the ground, breathes life right into him.
I love that imagery. It's like this brand new being made from the essence of the earth itself.
Exactly.
Okay, I know the Garden of Eden is coming up soon, but
Yeah.
before we get there, I'm curious about this mist.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something more to it?
Oh, there's definitely more to it than just a visual, for sure. It represents potential, like a world waiting to burst into life. It speaks to God's creative power, bringing life from these simple elements.
Right.
Like, it's a reminder that even without things we consider essential, like rain, life can still flourish.
That's a great point. I never
Yeah.
thought about it like that.
Yeah.
So where does this newly created man end up living?
Well, God plants this garden in Eden for him, filled with all these beautiful trees and delicious fruit, like abundance beyond imagination.
Wow.
But there are 2 trees that are particularly important.
Which ones?
The tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's interesting where they're located.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Genesis 2.9 tells us they're right in the midst of the garden.
Hmm.
It's not an accident, it's like they're front and center, accessible.
Right.
Almost feels like it's setting up what's about to happen, right?
Yeah, like a big flashing sign saying, choices ahead.
Yeah.
So about this garden,
Yeah.
we're not talking your average backyard garden, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely not. This is the Garden of Eden. It's got a river flowing out of it
Oh, wow.
that divides into 4 major rivers, each one with its own path, its own unique characteristics.
4 rivers. That's amazing.
It is.
Okay, I need to know more about these rivers.
Okay, so first we have the Pishon.
The Pishon.
Genesis 2.11 says it flows through the land of Havilah, which is known for its gold, bdellium, and onyx.
Wow, so it's like this river flowing through a land of incredible riches.
Yeah, you can almost picture it.
I know. Okay, what's next?
Then there's the Gihon.
Gihon.
It encircles the entire land of Cush.
Okay, and remind me, where's Cush?
Cush is often associated with ancient Ethiopia.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about a river that's like the border of a whole kingdom.
Yeah, this garden is massive.
This is amazing. Okay, what about the other two rivers?
All right, the third one is the Hiddekel.
Hiddekel.
It flows east towards Assyria. And then there's the Euphrates, which you're probably more familiar with,
Yeah.
one of the major rivers of Mesopotamia, a cradle of civilization.
So this Garden of Eden is geographically huge, with rivers connected to real places.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what happened to those other three rivers.
Yeah.
Did they change course? Did their names change? It's like a treasure map to this ancient paradise.
You know, you're right. Those geographic details have caused a lot of debate over the years.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Scholars have spent centuries poring over maps, trying to figure out where these rivers were and how they fit into the geography of the region.
That's so cool.
It is.
Okay, so amidst all of this amazing landscape, we have man entering the scene.
Right.
What's his purpose here? Is he just there to chill and enjoy the view?
Well, not exactly.
No.
Genesis 2.15 says that he's there to tend and keep the garden.
Okay, so he's got a job to do.
He does. He's like the first gardener taking care of this divine creation.
I like that.
But of course, there's a catch.
Here comes the forbidden fruit, right?
You got it. God tells him he can eat from any tree in the garden,
Okay.
except for one.
The tree of knowledge of good and evil?
And if he does, death.
Wow. Okay, so one tree off limits in this paradise, full of delicious fruit.
Right.
What's the significance of that? Is it just a test or something more?
It's a great question, and there are many different ways to understand it.
Okay.
Some see it as a test of obedience.
To see if he'd trust God and follow instructions.
Exactly. Others see it as a way to protect him.
Protect him from what?
From the weight of knowledge, the burden of understanding good and evil.
So it's like sometimes it's better not to know too much.
Right. It also brings up this idea of free will. God gives man the freedom to choose, but those choices have consequences.
So that balance between freedom and responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay, so man is in this amazing place, has this one rule to follow.
Yeah.
And then it gets even more interesting. Because in Genesis 2.18, God says, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him."
Right, and that's where we get that scene with all the animals.
Oh, yeah. God brings all the animals to man.
Yeah, man gets to name them.
I can just imagine him there, surrounded by all these creatures, trying to find one that really gets him.
And he names them all, but none of them are quite the right fit as a helper comparable to him.
I think that speaks to something really deep within us.
Oh, definitely.
That need for connection, for someone who understands us on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
So what happens next?
Well, God puts man into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs.
Wait, a rib?
Yeah.
Why a rib? Out of all the things, why choose a rib?
That's the question, isn't it? It's fascinated people for ages.
I'm hooked. Tell me more.
Well, one way to look at it is that it represents connection and equality.
Okay.
The rib, taken from close to Adam's heart, suggests that they come from the same source.
I see.
Like they're literally made from the same stuff.
It challenges the idea that woman is lesser than man.
Right. It suggests that they're equals, meant to be companions.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does, doesn't it?
So what's man's reaction when he sees woman for the first time?
He says, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man."
There's something really poetic about that.
There is.
It gets to the heart of that longing for connection.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to what happens next, how are Adam and Eve described in this, pre-apple eating state?
Genesis 2.25 says they were both naked,
Okay.
the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. It suggests innocence, purity, a time before self-consciousness and shame.
Like pure bliss.
Yeah, like they're unburdened by the complexities of the world.
But we all know that's about to change.
Of course. The story's getting ready for a huge shift.
Sorry.
From innocence to experience, from paradise to, well, the world as we know it.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
That's right. When we left off, Adam and Eve were living it up in the Garden of Eden.
Naked and unashamed.
Right, totally carefree. But remember that forbidden fruit.
Oh, yeah, that's going to come back to bite them.
It is. Let's talk about this fruit for a second.
Okay.
Is it really an apple?
Yeah, that's what we always see in pictures.
Well, the text never actually says what kind of fruit it is.
Huh. Interesting.
That whole apple thing came much later.
Okay, so what's the deal with the fruit then?
Yeah.
What makes it so special?
It represents knowledge, especially the knowledge of good and evil.
So it's not about the actual fruit, but what it symbolizes.
Exactly.
But why would gaining knowledge be a bad thing?
That's the million-dollar question.
I know, right?
One interpretation is that it's all about obedience.
Okay.
God's testing them to see if they'll trust him and follow his rules.
It's like proving their loyalty.
Right. But there's another way to look at it, too.
What's that?
It could be seen as protection.
Protection.
Yeah, God's protecting them from the burden of knowledge, the weight of understanding all the bad stuff in the world.
Kind of like ignorance is bliss.
Exactly.
But they do end up eating the fruit.
They do.
So what happens then? What are the consequences?
Oh, there are consequences, all right. Big time. Well, first of all, their eyes are opened. They become aware of their nakedness.
Oh.
They feel ashamed.
It's like that moment when you realize the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. That feeling of vulnerability.
And suddenly you feel exposed.
Right.
So they feel ashamed, then what?
They're afraid.
Makes sense.
They try to hide from God.
They hide from God. That's interesting.
It is.
So what does God do?
Well, he finds them, obviously.
All right.
It's not like he's yelling or anything.
Oh.
He actually starts asking them questions.
Like what?
He asks, "Where are you?" He asks, "Who told you that you were naked?"
Okay.
And then he asks, "Have you eaten from the tree that I told you not to eat?"
It seems like he already knows the answers.
He does.
So why ask?
He's not trying to trick them or anything. He's
No.
giving them a chance to reflect.
To think about what they've done.
Right, and understand the consequences.
Makes sense.
It's about accountability.
I see.
So what are those consequences?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, everyone involved gets punished in a way that fits their role in the story.
Okay, let's start with the serpent.
Okay.
He's the one who tempted Eve in the first place.
Right, and he gets hit pretty hard.
How
He's
he-
cursed to crawl on his belly and eat dust.
Ouch.
Yeah, like he's being brought low.
Okay, what about Eve?
Her punishment focuses on childbirth.
Oh,
God tells her that it's going to be much more painful now.
wow.
It's a direct link between disobedience and pain.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. And unfortunately, it's been used to justify the suffering of women for centuries.
Right.
We have to remember these texts were written in a different time,
Yeah.
but they still have a big impact on how we see the world today.
So we've got the serpent and Eve. What about Adam?
His punishment is connected to the earth.
Okay.
God tells him, "Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life."
So work is going to be harder now.
Way harder. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field.
No more easy living in paradise.
Nope. Now it's all about struggle and hardship.
So is that it? Are they just left to fend for themselves in this cursed world?
Not quite. There's one more important detail before they're kicked out of the garden.
Okay, I'm listening.
God makes clothes for them.
He makes them clothes.
Yeah, garments of skin.
I mean, I get they need clothes now, but is there more to it than that?
It could be an act of mercy.
Even though they've been punished.
Right.
Or maybe it's symbolic.
In what way?
Well, remember, they suddenly felt ashamed of being naked.
Right.
So maybe God's covering their shame.
It could be a gesture of divine care.
Like, even though they messed up, God still cares about them.
Yeah, I like that.
And then they're expelled from Eden.
Right, driven out of the garden.
It's guarded, right?
Yeah, cherubim and a flaming sword blocking the way to the tree of life.
It's such a powerful image.
It really is.
It's like the ultimate symbol of longing for something lost.
It speaks to so much of the human experience.
I know. Temptation, choice, consequence, loss.
And that complex relationship we have with the divine.
So much to unpack there.
There is.
Before we move on, though, I have one more question.
Okay.
We talked about Eve's purpose, being created from Adam's rib and all.
Yeah.
But what about Adam? What was his purpose in this whole thing?
That's a great question. To answer that, we need to look at the bigger picture. Because the story of Adam and Eve is just the beginning.
Okay, so where were we? Oh, yeah, that whole thing about Eve being created from Adam's rib.
Yeah, one of those details that just makes you think.
I know, right? What's the deeper meaning there? Why a rib?
You know, people have been asking that question for centuries.
Any answers?
There's no one right answer, really.
Okay,
But there are lots of interesting interpretations.
Oh, okay, lay it on me.
Well, one way to look at it is as the symbol of connection and equality. The rib being so close to the heart, and
Right?
it suggests this shared origin, like they're literally made from the same stuff.
Yeah, I like that.
It challenges the idea that woman is somehow lesser than man.
Definitely.
It's more about them being equals, meant to be partners.
I'm with you there.
Yeah.
Any other interesting takes on it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, what else?
Some people see the rib as a symbol of protection.
Protection.
Yeah, think about it. The rib cage protects your vital organs, right?
Right.
So maybe it means that man is supposed to protect and care for a woman.
Okay, that's interesting. So we've got connection, equality, protection.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how much meaning can come from one little detail.
It is, isn't it?
Are there any other interpretations that stand out to you?
There's one more I find particularly interesting.
I'm all ears.
It focuses on the symbolism of the side.
Okay.
Eve being created from Adam's side, not his head or his feet,
Right.
suggests she's not above him or below him, but beside him, his equal.
Not about hierarchy, but partnership.
Exactly.
Makes you rethink the traditional interpretations of this story.
It does, doesn't it?
It also makes me think about the word helper that's used to describe Eve.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
In Hebrew, that word can have a much deeper meaning.
It can.
It can also mean one who corresponds to, or one who completes.
Right, so it's not about subservience at all.
It's about mutual support, understanding.
Working together.
So God's choice to use a rib was very deliberate.
Absolutely packed with symbolic meaning.
It makes us think differently about the roles of men and women.
It does, not just in religious context, but in society as a whole.
We've talked about Adam and Eve's disobedience.
Yeah.
But what about God's role in all this?
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
I know, right?
It's interesting because God is both a creator and a rule setter.
Right. He gives them free will.
But also sets boundaries.
And consequences.
Yeah.
That balance between freedom and responsibility.
A classic theme.
It raises so many questions.
Oh, yeah.
About divine justice, the purpose of suffering.
The whole relationship between humans and God.
We could talk about this for hours.
We could?
But we've covered a lot of ground already. We started with this simple creation story and ended up talking about equality, partnership.
The nature of knowledge.
The big questions about our relationship with the divine.
What a journey.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how these ancient texts can still be so relevant today.
They're not just historical documents, they're living stories.
They really speak to us across time and cultures.
They do. They invite us to engage, to question, to find our own meaning.
To connect with these universal themes of love, loss, temptation.
The search for meaning and purpose.
We see ourselves in Adam and Eve.
We do. We wrestle with those same questions about choice and responsibility.
It feels like we've really explored everything there is to explore in Genesis 2.
Yeah, I think we've covered it all.
But before we sign off, I have one last question for our listeners to ponder.
Okay, hit me.
What if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten that fruit? Would we still be living in paradise?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Or is this knowledge of good and evil just an inevitable part of being human?
Now, that's a question for the ages.
It is. But it's something we all have to think about as we navigate our own lives.
For sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Genesis 2.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the stories that shape our world. Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to explore.
Well, today we're diving into a story that I'm pretty sure everyone thinks they know.
Yeah, Adam and Eve. That whole forbidden fruit situation.
Genesis chapter 3, that's where we're headed. But we're going way beyond the basic Sunday school version.
We're going deep, uncovering the symbolism, the psychology. Getting
into some pretty big questions about choice, consequence, and I think ultimately what it means to be human,
It's fascinating how this story actually begins, It's not this booming commandment from God or anything.
Right.
It's a question, and a very sly one at that, coming from the serpent.
Oh, yeah, the serpent, speaking of sneaky. So he asks Eve, does God actually say, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?
Right. So he's not outright lying, is he? It's more like twisting the truth.
Planting seeds of doubt. I mean, isn't that classic?
It is. He's shifting the focus away from obedience and towards, well, what Eve might gain. He dangles this idea of hidden knowledge. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
Oh, come on. Who wouldn't be tempted by that?
That's a powerful thing to put in front of someone.
And we can't forget about the fruit itself, right?
Absolutely not.
I mean, it's described as good for food and pleasant to the eyes, appealing to Eve's senses, obviously.
Naturally.
But then it also says it's desirable to make one wise.
Oh,
So there you go, appealing to that human desire for knowledge and understanding.
Right. It's like this multi-level marketing scheme for sin almost.
It really is.
It speaks to just how complex temptation can be. It's not always just basic physical desires, is it?
No.
It's this allure of something that promises to make us more than we are, give us power, knowledge, all that.
And Eve, she takes a bite,
Yeah.
but then she shares it with Adam. What was Adam thinking? He could have said no.
That's a great point. I mean, Adam's choice brings up all those questions of responsibility and influence, doesn't it?
It really does.
Why does he go along with it? What's that say about their relationship, how they make decisions together? Really makes you think.
What happens next is pretty intense. They realize they're naked.
Yeah.
They feel ashamed, so they hide from God.
I think if we look at this symbolically, it's almost like this metaphor for the loss of innocence.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
suddenly they're aware of their vulnerability and they have this instinct to cover up what they've done.
Shame and hiding, something I think we can all relate to, even today.
Oh, for sure.
Then there's that moment God calls out for Adam. Where are you?
God knows where he is, of course.
Right.
That's not a question because he needs information. This is God prompting Adam to reflect, to confront what he's done.
To own up.
Exactly.
But instead, what does Adam do? Blames Eve. And Eve, of course, blames the serpent.
It's like textbook passing the buck.
Isn't it? It's something we still see everywhere, from
Mm.
personal relationships to, unfortunately, global politics.
Absolutely. Avoiding responsibility, it's this deeply ingrained human pattern.
So then, the punishment. Serpent cursed to crawl on his belly, eat dust.
Right.
Eve cursed with pain and childbirth, and a shift in her relationship with Adam.
Mm.
Then Adam cursed to toil and struggle against nature. Seems harsh.
Some people take those punishments very literally, but they can also be understood symbolically as representations of the consequences of actions.
So the serpent slithering in the dust, a symbol for the deceitful, earthbound nature of evil.
Yes, exactly. And Eve's curse, being tied to pain and childbirth and this shift in her relationship with Adam, it could reflect, the societal burdens, the roles often placed on women.
And then there's Adam's punishment, the toil of labor, that constant struggle against, a now unforgiving natural world.
And you could interpret that as representing the challenges of surviving in a world that's been fundamentally changed by their actions. It's interesting to think about Adam's curse in the context of, say, the agricultural revolution. It marked a huge shift in how we interact with nature, manipulating, controlling it for survival. It brought progress, yes, but also so many of the environmental consequences we're still grappling with.
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking connection. Makes it feel very relevant to us today. But even after all that, there's this other detail. God gives Adam and Eve clothing made from animal skins.
It seems like a small thing, but it's actually incredibly significant, this act of mercy, acknowledging their vulnerability.
Makes you wonder, maybe it's also foreshadowing some of the ideas of sacrifice and atonement that are, so important in religious thought.
Absolutely. It's a complex gesture with a lot of potential interpretations. And then there's that line from God, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil." Pretty ironic, isn't it?
It is. They were so determined to gain knowledge, but look what it cost them. And I find it fascinating that this idea that the knowledge they gained fundamentally changed them, separated them from that state of innocence.
And of course, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, banished from paradise.
Talk about a fall from grace.
Yes.
You need to unpack this a little more. What does it all mean?
Yeah, it really highlights this significant shift. Guarding the tree of life, the expulsion from the garden, it symbolizes the separation from that state of pure divine presence.
Yeah.
They're on their own now.
Into a world where good and evil, it's all mixed up,
Exactly.
thrust into this existential drama, right?
It's like they're forced to grapple with the weight of their choices and try to, figure it all out. Which I guess, isn't that the core of the human condition in a way?
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're always searching for knowledge and understanding, but always limited by our own perspectives. This story has resonated for so long, though, across cultures and religions. Why do you think that is?
It's gotta be, because the story of Adam and Eve, it taps into those, those universal truths about being human, that pull towards the forbidden, the struggle between our desires and what we know is right.
The consequences.
The impact of our choices, that constant search for meaning in a world that, often feels pretty chaotic. These are all things we deal with as human beings.
It makes you wonder, though, what if they hadn't eaten the fruit?
Yeah.
Would we still be in the Garden of Eden, totally oblivious,
Oh, maybe. But would that blissful ignorance, would it really reflect what it means to be human? Maybe it's through those challenges, making those tough choices, experiencing both the joys and the sorrows. That's how we learn, that's how we grow.
There's that saying, smooth seas never made a skilled sailor. Right.
Mm.
Maybe that fall from grace, as tragic as it seems, it was necessary for our evolution.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? Maybe the real heart of this story, it's not the fall itself, but what we do after.
How we pick ourselves up.
How we learn, we grow, how we try to become better in a world that's now inherently complex and challenging.
Okay, let's go back to the serpent for a minute. I'm curious about his role in all of this. Is he just like a sneaky snake? Or is there something more?
He's often seen as a representation of temptation, deceit, even evil itself.
Right.
But you're right, there's definitely more to him than that. He's a catalyst.
For change.
Exactly. He introduces doubt, offers a different perspective. Ultimately, he sets the stage for Adam and Eve to make their own choices.
He's almost like a trickster figure.
Yeah.
Something you see in a lot of mythology. Shakes things up, disrupts the established order, forces us to question what we believe.
And that can be, that can push us towards a new understanding of ourselves, the world.
Exactly. And that disruption, that questioning, it can be uncomfortable, even painful at times, but it can also lead to growth,
Change.
a deeper awareness of our own power to choose.
Yeah.
So even the serpent, a figure so closely associated with negativity, he might actually play a pretty vital role in the human story.
I think he does. He represents this force that challenges complacency, encourages critical thinking, and ultimately pushes us to define our own values, make our own choices.
He throws a wrench in the gears.
Yeah.
And we had to figure out how to put it all back together.
Hopefully in a way that makes us stronger.
More resilient.
It's messy, it's complicated, but it's through that process that we become more than just passive inhabitants of paradise.
We become active participants in shaping our own destiny.
Right.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's like the fall from grace is not the ending. It's the start of a whole new chapter.
Precisely. It's the chapter where we as individuals, as a species, grapple with the complexities of good and evil. Knowledge, ignorance, choice, consequence.
Welcome to being human. It's messy, it's challenging, and it's full of paradoxes. Now, what are you going to do with it?
That's a great way to put it. It really does challenge us to consider what it means to be human, to make choices in a world where those choices have real consequences.
So how does this ancient story, how does it connect to our lives today? I mean, it's easy to think of Adam and Eve as, mythical figures, but what does their experience actually tell us about how we navigate the world now?
It reminds us that all those choices we make, every single day they have consequences. We're all tempted by things that might seem appealing on the surface, but could lead to, regret or unintended outcomes.
You mean like that extra slice of cake?
Well, maybe, but I'm also thinking about the bigger choices. The decisions we make in our relationships, in our careers, the way we interact with the world around us. Are we acting with integrity, with compassion? Are we making wise choices? Or are we giving in to, fear, greed, the desire for instant gratification?
Almost like we're each navigating our own version of the Garden of Eden, constantly encountering those metaphorical trees of knowledge.
I like that analogy. And the point isn't to avoid knowledge or making choices altogether. It's about approaching those choices with awareness and being willing to accept the consequences, both good and bad.
It sounds like a lot of responsibility.
It is, but there's also a sense of empowerment in that responsibility. We have the power to shape our own lives, to learn from our mistakes, to strive to be better.
Yeah, it really is. It's that ability to choose our path and to learn from the journey. It reminds me of something you said earlier about this story. It's not meant to make us feel guilty or ashamed, right?
Exactly. It's not about dwelling on the mistakes. It's about challenging ourselves to think, to think critically about the choices we make, the kind of people we want to be.
We're all imperfect, capable of good and bad. But there's hope in that too, because it means we can grow, we can find redemption, and ultimately understand ourselves and our place in the world a little better.
I think that's the enduring legacy of this story. It resonates with us because it speaks to what it means to be human, to struggle, to question, to make choices, to find meaning in a world that's, well, it's both beautiful and broken, isn't it?
We've covered so much in this deep dive. Temptation, choice, consequence, free will, the list goes on. But before we wrap up, I have one final question for you. If you were standing in the Garden of Eden, face to face with that, that tempting tree of knowledge, what would you do?
Oh, that's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves. But I think the most important thing isn't whether we'd take a bite or not. It's how we would approach that choice. Would we just give in blindly? Or would we pause, consider the potential consequences of our actions? The story of Adam and Eve, it's not just about, a single choice in a mythical garden. It's about the choices we make every day, the impact they have on ourselves, our relationships, the world around us. This deep dive, it's really just the beginning. The story continues in each of our lives.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Genesis. It's a story that continues to spark questions, debate, and maybe even a little introspection. We hope you'll keep exploring these ideas with us, and until next time, keep thinking deeply.
All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling Cain and Abel.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
One of those stories, everyone kind of remembers from Sunday school.
Right. Classic.
But we're going deeper here.
Way deeper.
Absolutely. This is more than just like sibling rivalry,
Exactly. It's about jealousy, it's about rage, murder, the very first one, but also, and this is what I find so interesting, it's about kind of the beginning of civilization.
It's crazy how like a story this old, right? Thousands of years still like hits us right where we live,
It's true.
It's like a psychological thriller, but ancient.
Totally. I was reading it again in Genesis 4, and it's how fast everything goes bad that got me.
Oh, yeah.
We start with Adam and Eve, obviously, after the whole garden thing, trying to figure out life.
Right, could go with it.
Exactly, and they have these two sons, Cain, he's the farmer, and Abel, who's the shepherd.
Seems straightforward enough on the surface.
You'd think, right? But there's this tension already.
Oh, yeah, from the get-go.
When they bring their offerings to God, Abel's is the one God likes, the firstborn lamb, all that Cain brings fruit, but doesn't go over so well.
No, not so much.
And the thing is, it never says W-H-Y. Like, W-H-Y God prefers Abel's. What do you think?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The text, it's like, it's leaving it open on purpose, I think. Makes us work for it, wrestle with it.
I like that.
So some scholars, they focus on the offerings themselves.
Right.
Abel's is a blood sacrifice. That was huge back then.
Right.
Seen as more precious, more giving up something important.
It's almost like foreshadowing, for later sacrifices in religion.
Exactly. But then others, they look at the inner part,
Yeah.
like, what's the person offering feeling?
Oh, interesting.
Maybe Abel was just more humble about it, more devoted.
Well, Cain, maybe. There's some pride there, some resentment.
Could be.
So it's the why, not just the what.
Exactly. And now it gets good, right? God doesn't like reject Cain's offering outright, but there's this warning about sin lying at the door. Like it's this moment, this choice.
Right.
Overcome the jealousy or give into it.
And well, we know what happens. Cain takes Abel out to the fields, and it's rough.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
First murder right there in the Bible, and the way it's described, it's so raw, so powerful.
Like this explosion of pure rage.
Totally. And then of course God shows up, asks that famous question.
Oh yeah.
Am I my brother's keeper? Cain trying to avoid responsibility, but it's a question we're still asking today, right?
Big time. What do we owe each other?
Yeah.
It's in everything, like personal stuff, global stuff, justice, human rights, all of it.
It all comes back to that.
For sure. And Cain, he gets hit hard, right? Cursed, exiled, on the run.
Right.
But here's the thing. He doesn't just disappear.
He keeps going.
He does. Has a son, Enoch, and then wait for it, builds a city.
A whole city. That's not what I expected.
Yeah. Right. It's like it messes with our idea of good guy, bad guy,
Totally. Cain, the murderer, he's also a builder, a founder.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
So is this city, is it like repentance? Or is it like defiance? Or something else entirely?
Up to us, I think how we read it. Could be Cain trying to do something good out of all that bad, like atoning for what happened. But could also be him like rejecting God even more, building his own thing.
It's like civilization itself being built on this foundation of violence.
Yeah, and that tension, creation, AD, destruction, good and evil all mixed up, that's all over this story.
It really makes you question if anyone's ever totally beyond saving,
It does. Okay. Good come from bad. It's a question that's still with us.
And it's not just Cain either. His descendants, they go on to do some pretty major stuff. We have Jabal, he's the livestock guy. Jugal, he's like the father of music, right?
That's right. And then there's Tubal-Cain, the metalworker. Master craftsman.
It's wild, right? The line of the first murderer, they bring us culture, technology, art.
Yeah, it's not so simple. Who's good, who's bad?
Definitely a lot of nuance. And then it gets even darker, right? We've got Lamech way down the line, descendant of Cain, bragging about killing a young man.
Oh yeah, that poem, that's chilling stuff.
It's like things are spiraling out of control, you know?
It is a dark turn, but maybe it's there to make a point. Like, contrast it with God protecting Cain earlier.
Right, right.
Is humanity losing it, or is it showing us that violence just keeps repeating?
Makes you think about justice and revenge and all that.
For sure. It's like progress isn't always a straight line, you know? Sometimes we go backwards.
Definitely. But then just when it seems like everything's going to hell, there's this spark of hope, right?
Seth,
Seth, Adam and Eve's third son,
a new start.
replacing Abel, kind of. And right after we get that line about people starting to call on God's name.
Yeah, like something's shifting.
Like a new beginning.
That's huge E. And that's where we pick up next time in part 2.
The story's just getting started. So we're back. And last time, things were, well, kind of hopeful, right? Seth being born, people starting to pray, all that.
Yeah, Seth, he's often seen as this turning point, right? Like after Abel's death, Cain taking out, it's like a reset, you know,
Fresh start.
for humanity, but on a spiritual level too.
But Cain and his line, they don't just, like, disappear, do they?
Right, we were talking about that, how they vent things, but there's also that darkness, that violence.
It's like that good and evil thing. It's still, like, swirling around.
It's never simple, is it? The story doesn't, like, separate everyone neatly. The good guys over here, the bad guys there.
It's messier than that.
Way messier.
Yeah.
It's this constant struggle, you know, light and shadow playing out over generations.
Makes me think about Noah and the flood and all that. I remember learning about it, but never really connected it back to Cain and Abel.
It's a few generations later, but yeah, the flood, it's often seen as like a response to how bad things had gotten right. And some scholars, they think that badness, it comes partly from Cain's descendants, their influence.
Oh, interesting.
Remember, they're the ones with the new tech, the metalworking, the music, all that.
Right, right.
Which can be good, but also, you know.
It could be used for bad stuff, too.
Exactly. It's like
Yes.
progress has two sides, always.
It does make you think. So the flood, is God just like wiping everyone out because they're bad? Or is it more complicated than that?
Good question. It's like, is the world so messed up, so far from how it should be, that it needs a complete do-over?
Like starting from scratch.
Right. But what about Cain's descendants specifically, after the flood? Do they all die?
Yeah. What happens to them?
It's actually kind of vague. The text, it doesn't say for sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some people think they were wiped out, gone completely. Others, they say maybe some survived.
Yeah.
And they kept, you know, influencing things even after the flood. Like their ideas, their way of doing things, it lived on.
So even with this massive flood, like washing everything away, Cain and Abel's story, it still keeps going.
It's like that tension we were talking about, creation and destruction,
Yeah.
good and bad. It takes on different forms.
It's in our DNA almost.
Maybe it is. That's what makes this story stick with us. You know, it's not just like history. It's about being human, period.
We're a part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Struggle to be good when we can also be so bad. It's in all of us.
And the story, it doesn't give us like easy answers, does it? It's not like do this, don't do that.
No, it's more like it makes us think, figure things out for ourselves. What's good? What's evil?
What's fair? What's merciful?
Right. And those questions, they're not going away.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Speaking of questions, there's one thing we haven't touched on much. The mark of Cain.
Oh, yeah.
What's your take on that? What is it even? And why is it so important?
The mark. It's one of the most mysterious parts of this whole thing. The text, it doesn't say exactly what it's, you know.
Like, is it a real mark or something else?
Could be physical, like a scar or a brand. But it could also be symbolic, showing Cain's guilt or even God's protection.
It's to protect him.
Yeah. So no one else can kill him. That's the point.
So it's not like punishment then.
Right. It's more like God saying, enough violence, putting a stop to it.
But it's Cain. He committed the first murder. It makes you think about like what's fair, what's mercy, all that.
It does. Is justice about revenge? Or is it about stopping the cycle, breaking that chain?
It's almost like a safe place, you know, like sanctuary or asylum, but for someone who did something awful.
It's a tough one, for sure. To someone like Cain, do they deserve protection? Can they be forgiven truly without being punished? Tough questions. The story, it doesn't give us the answers on a silver platter, you know?
It makes us wrestle with it.
It does. Makes us look at ourselves and at justice and all its messiness.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. But we'll have to leave it there for now. Don't go anywhere, though, because in part 3, we're going to talk about the legacy of Cain and Abel, what it all means for us today. All right, part 3, final round, Cain and Abel.
That's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
It has. I gotta say, this whole conversation, it's really stuck with me. This story, it's not just some ancient thing, you know? It's like, it's about us, about being human.
I think so, too. And it's amazing how this one little story, it pops up everywhere, right? In art, books, even theology, like for centuries.
It's like a seed that keeps growing, you know? New ideas, new meaning.
Totally. It's never finished.
One thing I keep coming back to is that progress and destruction thing. Like, we see Cain building a city, his kids making music, working with metal, but it's like there's always this darkness there too, right? This feeling that things could go bad really fast.
You're right. It's like the story saying, hey, progress, it's not always like a straight line up. You know, there's always a downside.
Two sides to every coin.
For sure. Like, look at us today, right? We've got incredible technology, but we can also destroy everything with it.
It's scary sometimes. And it makes that question, am I my brother's keeper? It makes it feel really, really real.
No kidding. It's not just something you hear in Sunday school anymore, is it?
Not with everything going on in the world.
It's like it's demanding an answer from us, but it's not always easy to know what that answer is.
Right. It's not just about like being nice to people or forgiving them.
No, it's deeper. It's about realizing that we're all connected, that what I do affects you and what you do affects me.
And it goes on and on like ripples.
Exactly. Like we talked about the mark of Cain, how I was supposed to protect him.
Yeah.
But he's the murderer. It's a weird thing, isn't it?
What does it makes you wonder about, like, how far does justice go? How far does mercy go?
Right. It's like this guy does this horrible thing, but then he gets this divine protection. What do we make of that?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. I think it tells us something about God, you know, about how God's justice works. It's not always about punishment. It's also about stopping more bad stuff from happening.
But then what about Cain himself? Does he ever face any real consequences? Can we just be forgiven like that without paying for what we did?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that good stories, they make us ask those questions.
They don't give us the easy answer.
No, they don't. Cain and Abel, it's not like a fairy tale, you know, with a clear moral. It's more like it's holding up a mirror to us to how messy and complicated being human really is.
It's real life in a story.
That's it, exactly. So wrapping things up here, what do you think, what's the biggest thing we can learn from all this? Like, what do we take with us from Cain and Abel into our own lives?
That's a good one. What do we take with us?
I think for me, it's that idea that we all have both in us the good and the bad. We can create, but we can also destroy.
We have the power to choose.
We do.
Yeah.
And Cain and Abel, it's like, it's reminding us of that. It's saying, hey, be aware of what you're capable of, make good choices, and try to build a world where good things win out. You know, where there's compassion and justice and all that.
That's like a call to action almost.
I think it is. We're not just watching this story, we're in it.
Every choice matters.
It does. And even when we screw up, when we don't live up to it, there's still hope.
There's always hope.
For sure. Cain and Abel, it doesn't promise us anything, but it does say, hey, even when it's dark, even when there's violence, there's always a chance to heal, to forgive, to make things better.
I like that. It's not an ending, it's a beginning.
It is. And for everyone listening, we want to leave you with this. What does Cain and Abel mean to you? How does it fit into your life, into the world you see around you? Keep thinking about it and let us know what you come up with. Thanks for being with us on this deep dive.
It's been real, folks.
All right, so have you ever looked at those ages in the Bible and thought, wait, what?
Oh, absolutely.
900 years old. Like, how?
It's wild.
Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the book of Genesis.
Okay.
Specifically, chapter 5. We're going to be looking at Adam's family line
Right.
and the ages of his descendants.
Sounds good.
So buckle up, everybody, because we're talking some seriously big numbers.
All right.
And for this deep dive, we're using the new King James Version of the Bible.
Okay.
So we're starting right at the beginning.
Yeah.
With Adam, created in God's image.
Yeah.
Right? And the text tells us that this guy lived for 930 years.
Wow.
930.
That's a long time.
He had his son, Seth, when he was 130 years old.
Okay.
And then he lived another 800 years after that.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I know. It's just like, what were they doing for 800 years? I mean, I get bored after like a week.
Well, and you think about all the things that he must have seen
Yeah.
during those 800 years.
Just the changes in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really makes you think, doesn't it, about, how the ancient Hebrews viewed time
Totally.
and longevity and what it might have meant to them.
Yeah, because like if you think about our modern perspective,
Right.
it's so different. We think of like 80 years as a good long life.
Mm-hmm.
But back then it was like centuries.
And it's not just Adam, it's his descendants too.
Oh yeah, we're just getting started.
Exactly.
So we've got Seth, who lived for 912 years.
Okay.
Enosh for 905. Canaan for 910, Mahalalel for 895,
Wow.
and then Jared for 962 years.
It's like, how is that even possible?
I know. It's like, were they eating like some special diet?
Right. Or breathing different air.
I don't know. Maybe they had like super genes or something.
Well, some scholars suggest that maybe these ages weren't meant to be taken literally.
Oh, interesting.
Like maybe they were symbolic in some way.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, maybe they represent something more than just the number of years they lived. Like maybe they were talking about spiritual maturity or their closest to God. Or even, some scholars suggest that maybe the ancient Hebrews just had a completely different way of measuring time.
Oh, so like their years weren't our years.
Exactly.
Okay, so it could be like symbolic or a different kind of time.
Right.
But, I mean, the text does say years,
It does, yeah.
So part of me wants to take it literally.
Yeah, I understand that.
But then those numbers are just so massive, it's
Yeah.
hard to wrap your head around it.
Well, and it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think it's literal or metaphorical?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
That's a good question.
What do you think?
It's tough to say. I mean, I can see both sides, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's part of what makes these stories so fascinating,
It is, for sure.
is that they really make you think.
They do.
And they challenge our assumptions about the world.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so we got to keep moving, though, through these family lines.
Okay, let's go.
We got a lot more people to cover.
Okay, so next up we have Enoch.
Okay.
Now, his story is especially interesting.
How so?
Well, unlike his ancestors, who, lived for like 900-something years,
Right.
he only lived for 365.
Oh, wow. That's a lot shorter.
Yeah, it's way shorter.
Interesting.
But what's really unique about him is that it says that he walked with God and then was not, for God took him.
Now that's a line that's always fascinated me.
I know, right?
It's so mysterious.
It is, because it doesn't really give us any details.
Right.
It just says God took him.
Yeah, so how did he take him?
Exactly.
Where'd he go?
Right, like, was he physically taken up to heaven?
Yeah.
Or did he, transcend to some other spiritual plane?
Right, what does taken even mean in this context?
I know, it's so open to interpretation.
And I think that's part of what makes it so powerful.
Yeah, it
Because
is.
it lets us bring our own understanding and beliefs to the story
Yeah.
and kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what was so special about Enoch
Exactly.
that God would just take him like that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he must have been a pretty righteous dude.
Right. He walked with God, after all.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to count for something.
It certainly does.
All right, well, moving on, we come to Methuselah.
Okay.
Now, this guy is famous for being the oldest person mentioned in the Bible.
Oh, yeah, Methuselah.
Yeah.
He's the one everyone remembers.
I know, right?
For his age.
He lived to be 969 years old.
It's almost 1,000 years.
It's insane, right?
Imagine all the things he must have seen and experienced in that time.
Oh, I know. It's mind-boggling.
Wars, famines, natural disasters, technological advancements. I mean, who knows what else?
And think about the stories he could tell.
Right.
Like, what was it like back then?
Yeah.
What was the world like when it was brand new?
Yeah, and to be able to pass down that knowledge and those experiences.
It's like a living history book.
Exactly.
So, Methuselah had his son Lamech at the age of 187.
Oh, wow. That's still pretty old to be having kids.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like, my dad was like 30 when he had me.
Right. Totally different times.
So, Lamech lived for 777 years.
Another big number.
I know, these guys, they just kept going and going.
It's like they had some secret to longevity.
I wish we knew what it was.
Me too.
So then we come to Lamech's son, Noah.
Okay, Noah,
Yeah, the guy who built the ark.
the one and only.
Yeah.
So what's interesting here, right, is that Noah was 500 years old before the flood happened.
500 years old. That's like middle-aged for these guys.
Right. Like he's just getting started.
I know. And what's also interesting is what Lamech said when he named his son.
Oh, okay, what did he say?
So he said that Noah would comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed.
Now that's a powerful statement.
It is, and it's really important in setting up the whole story of the flood.
Right, because it's almost like Lamech is prophesying.
Yeah, like he's got a glimpse of the future,
Yeah, that Noah is going to play a major role in saving humanity.
and that he's going to bring comfort and relief
Exactly.
from all the hardships that they've been going through.
It's a real turning point in the narrative.
Yeah, it is.
So to wrap up this whole family line,
Okay.
we've got Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Right, the famous trio.
Yeah, and they're born when Noah was 500 years old.
So still pretty young for him, right?
Relatively speaking, yeah.
And these names are important because they represent the forefathers of different nations.
According to biblical tradition, that's right.
So you've got Shem, who's considered the ancestor of the Semitic people.
Right, like the Hebrews and then Arabs.
Then you've got Ham, who's the ancestor of the Hamitic people.
Like the Egyptians and the Canaanites.
And then Japheth, who's the ancestor of the Japhetic people.
Like the Indo-Europeans.
So it's like from this one family, all the different nations of the earth emerge.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is.
This whole idea of branching out
Yeah, from a single lineage.
to this diverse tapestry of humanity.
Yeah, it's really setting the stage for all the stories that come later in Genesis.
And it kind of reflects, you know, the reality of human migration and the spread of people across the world.
It's like we're seeing the beginnings of human history unfold.
Exactly.
Wow, so that was quite a journey through those early generations.
It was, wasn't it?
We've encountered some truly incredible lifespans.
Like, seriously long lifespans.
I know, it's hard to even imagine living for that long.
Yeah, I mean, what would we even do with all that time?
I know, but I'm sure we'd figure something out.
Probably.
And then there's the whole mystery surrounding Enoch.
Right. Like, what happened to him?
Yeah, where did he go?
It's one of those enduring questions.
It is, and I don't know if we'll ever have a definitive answer.
Probably not, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Sometimes the mystery is part of what makes it so fascinating.
it is.
So thinking about those lifespans, right?
Yeah.
Whether they were literal or symbolic, it really makes you wonder, what do you think they represent?
That's a good question.
Like, do you think they were just trying to convey how long ago these people lived?
Maybe.
Or was there a deeper meaning?
Like what?
Well, maybe they were trying to express something about the relationship between humanity and the divine.
Like how close those early generations were to God.
Exactly. Or maybe they were trying to highlight the idea of righteousness and how living a good life could lead to a long and prosperous life.
That's interesting.
It is, isn't it?
It makes you think.
It does.
And that's what we're all about here.
That's right.
Getting people to think.
To ask questions.
Yeah, and to explore these ancient texts.
And come to their own conclusions.
Exactly. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible lifespans of Genesis.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time
See you then.
for another deep dive.
Into the mysteries of the Bible.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.